Welcome to Where Parents Talk. I'm Lianne Castelino. Our guest today is a father of two and a clinical psychologist who's been in practice for over 40 years. He's also a speaker and a consultant who's worked with multinationals and governments. He is also an author of more than 10 books. Dr. Hank Weisinger has recently co-authored a book called The Unlikely Art of Parental Pressure, a positive approach to pushing your child to be their best self. He joins us from Norwalk, Connecticut. Thank you so much for being here today.
No, my pleasure. Happy to be here with you.
I wanted to start by saying, obviously, the title of your book is just so attention-grabbing and certainly incredibly resonant for the world that we live in. Perhaps a natural starting point may well be to define pressure.
Well, there's all different types of pressure. And I would say everybody listening, it's a universal experience. Experience is the feeling of pressure when you are in a situation where the outcome is uncertain and the result is dependent on your performance. So that could be giving a presentation, it could be taking a test, whether it's a driver's test or a college test. Now, parental pressure is defined as expectations that the child feels are impossible or exceedingly difficult to accomplish. And the more important those expectations are to the child, which might be phrased in, I don't want to let my parents down, the more pressure that child will experience. So while we all experience pressure, when we're in an important situation, the outcome is important, the results are dependent on us. Parental pressure, again, is the child feeling these expectations are impossible for me to meet, and they're really important.
It's interesting because you and your co-author have gone so far as to call parental pressure of this kind a global pandemic of its own. Why do you describe it that way?
Because there are, based on studies that have been conducted all over the world, on every continent, it has unhealthy effects. The research is very consistent that unhealthy parental pressure is infecting our youth with a host of mental illness issues, such as substance abuse, eating disorders, low self-esteem, anxiety disorders. I mean, that is not just happening in America, it's happening in China, Australia, the UK, Germany, Switzerland. These are all countries that have been doing studies on some aspect of parental pressure. And after a while, it becomes very predictable in terms of just knowing what the results of any study is going to be as soon as I see the phrase parental pressure.
So on that note, as somebody who's been on the front lines as a clinical psychologist for over 40 years, what concerns you most about this phenomenon and where it's headed?
I would say what concerns me most is that, let's say that a kid is in college or high school and he's experiencing a lot of pressure, and all of a sudden he turns as a way of coping, substances or some other disorder. What concerns me most is that the child is quickly identified as the problem. The parent-child relationship is an interaction. Both bring something to the table. So one of the things I want parents to think about is when they exert pressure, what are they bringing to the table? In other words, I'm saying what concerns me most is the parents not taking responsibility for how they put pressure on their child. And they're good intentions. Every parent listening wants the best for their kids. And on a concrete level, parents many times inadvertently put pressure on their kids by saying things like, this test is really important. See, the more important you make something, the more pressure you experience. It's counterintuitive, but what the parent would be better off saying is, it's no big deal, because that will keep it in perspective for the kid and not increase that pressure. But parents, when they say it's an important test, their intent is, I just want to remind you that this is important for you to, really study and do your best and so on.
So for many parents listening, that is a huge mindset shift and, a shift in their approach. So what do you suggest for them to roll that back or dial it down, or again, shift and pivot the way that they're approaching that pressure?
I think they have to, and that's a good point, because again, it gets the parents to look at themselves. That was the idea of the book. Rather than just focusing on your kid, what can the parent do that can change unhealthy pressure to healthy pressure? And one of the things that they can do is step back and look at what their own expectations are. Are their expectations based on their own aspirations that they're putting on the kid? Did the parents really want to be doctors, so now they want their son to be a doctor or their daughter to be a doctor? Did the parents really want to be Olympic athletes, so now they push their kids into a sport that the child may or may not have any interest in? So I think when the parents start to look at their own expectations, where do they come from? How are they formulated? Are they realistic? It would certainly be unrealistic for most parents to think that their kid is going to be the top student in every endeavor that they take, whether it's on an athletic field or whether it's on, on the stage or in a classroom. So stepping back, looking at yourself. Why are you doing this in the first place in terms of exerting pressure? I want parents to think of, how do they apply pressure? Do they guilt the kid? You know how much money we spent on giving you lessons to do this, and now you're not even trying, and so on? I mean, those are everyday comments that parents tend to make. And again, the paradox is they're not doing it to hurt their child. They are doing it because they think it helps their child.
So on that note about expectations, if we were to sort of get even more granular about that point, why are expectations being set so high? In other words, what are the contributing factors to the expectations and then ultimately to the pressure that's being exerted?
I would say that the major reason is that parents tend to see, not all parents, but what I like to call pressure parents, they see the world as a very competitive environment, a dog-eat-dog world. That's why it's no longer keeping up with the Joneses. You got to be better than the Joneses. It's not just going to a good school, it's going to a better school than other people, because they think that will give their kid an edge. Think of the cheating scandal, the varsity blues scandal. I mean, that really exemplified that many parents are willing to do anything, even violate the rules, to get the best for their child. And I think a lot of that is because of the competitiveness. And as a result of the competitiveness, these parents are thinking that in order for my son or daughter to be the best, they have to be perfect. So now they develop a sense of perfectionism. No, whatever the kid does, it can always be better. It is, quote, never good enough. And they make everything really important. This is the most important test of your life. How many times did I say that? This is the most important test of my life. I've probably said that at least 1,000 times going through undergraduate and graduate school. I can't even remember all those, quote, important tests. And then because it's competitive and you have to be perfect and there's only a few opportunities, there's not enough to go around for everybody, you got to do it now. And that's where the urgency starts to come in. Now, if you're on the receiving end of that, that is a tough way to be living every single day. A Chinese student told me that the best part of his day was walking to school and home. He said, now it's the worst. It's like walking under a dark cloud, because all he is thinking about is how well he has to do in school. And that's what is happening. And as I said, global pandemic, it is worse in other countries.
We are going to talk a bit more about the global pandemic and its impact on parental pressure. But I do want to address the college scandal that you brought up. I wonder, given what you do for a living and how long you've been doing this, and you've sort of seen the evolution on different levels, what, if anything, struck you or even surprised you or didn't surprise you about that college scandal, which, basically started in the States but grabbed international headlines in a hurry?
Well, it didn't surprise me in terms of what parents would do. Is there really any different than somebody writing a check out for millions of dollars to an endowment fund to get their kid into a particular school? That happens every day. I think we seem to accept that, but what was really surprising is the lying to their own kids. And I will tell you what I think that gets to the heart too, is these parents did not trust their kids to succeed. They thought they had to give them a boost, that they are not capable of doing it on their own. Think if if you were a kid and you found out your parents did that, how would that make you feel? And what it also told me is that the parents, much more than I thought, are really self-centered rather than focusing on their kid. Can any parent really rationally think that it's beneficial to their son or daughter to get them into a school via cheating, having somebody take their test, forging documents? So that tells me, as a psychologist, these parents are thinking of themselves. I'm not paying $500,000 to somebody to get my son into Harvard. I'm paying that $500,000 so I can say that my son goes to Harvard. And that is one of the things I want parents to think about. Are there expectations about their own needs, or are they truly about the child's need? I spoke to a group of parents once on the subject of finding the best fit for college for your teen. And what I wanted them to realize is that the best school they can get into is not necessarily the right school. So one of the things that concerns me is that parents are not concerned with getting their kid into the right environment. They think of it as getting it into the best environment. So I can get my kid into a Yale or Harvard, but what for? The school's going to be too hard for them. Why would any parent want their kid in a school where the demands of the school outmatch the resources that the child has? That's what creates a sense of feeling overwhelmed and stressed out. And then the parents will say, well, take a stress management class or counseling. That's what concerns me, is that many parents do not have the insight that they are contributing to the pressure that their son or daughter experiences.
I want to talk a little bit about the research that went into your book. And part of the research yielded 8 different evidence-based strategies. So let's talk a bit about the background in terms of what you did as it relates to the research into this book.
Okay. I started out with the premise, and the premise was that there are some kids who are very successful and have zero mental health issues, at least not diagnosable ones. There are other kids who may or may not be successful, but they have mental health issues. A differentiating factor between those two groups, we found, was how the parents exert pressure around 3 different areas: how they communicate it, how they respond in terms of parental involvement, and also around the concept of acceptance and rejection, conditional acceptance versus unconditional acceptance. Then we started reading articles. We started to see common themes that were repetitive in every study. And then it became to the point where we quickly saw that if you exhibit certain attributes as a parent, for example, when you criticize your teen child in a way that is instructional versus flaw finding, those kids do better. If a parent is supportive when a kid fails versus judgmental and rejecting and cold, the child does better. So that's how we sort of pieced together until we had our own theory of parental pressure that was incorporating studies in all these different types of academic journals that other researchers were using. And then our clinical research would be interviewing parents, interviewing students. And what we quickly saw was the clinical interviewing validated the findings that we had seen, or we could say that the findings we found predicted what we were going to find in our clinical interviews. And we found different ways of how parents exert that pressure, and when it's unhealthy pressure, it's very clear, flaw finding, giving superficial praise, for example, using questions not to help the child articulate their interests, their feelings, but rather to interrogate. Give me the facts. What'd you get on the test? What did the teacher say? Who are you talking to? That's what we saw. That's what served the research. And then, we have a chapter for parents on helping your kid perform under pressure. Again, those were all evidence-based strategies. For example, the parent who minimizes the importance of a situation rather than over-exaggerates it will help their child perform more effectively under pressure. The parent who preaches that you will have multiple opportunities versus this is a do or die situation. This is the biggest opportunity you're ever going to get. Don't blow the interview, versus the parent who says there's going to be hundreds of interviews. Those kids will do better. And these become lessons that the parent can start to build into their daily conversations with their child that over the long run will create psychological capital, such as confidence, optimism, tenacity, and enthusiasm. I like to call that the coat of armor. That my goal is for every parent to wake up and say, how can I build my child's coat of armor? Confidence, optimism, tenacity, and enthusiasm.
That's such a strong and powerful statement and way to sort of, encapsulate and remember it. And the examples that you provide, just paint such a strong picture for parents who may be listening or watching to this. So I wonder, do you have any other anecdotes or examples of, students, families you have seen?
Let me give you
tried to help with
a personal example, because one of the core points of the book that really involves everything about parental pressure is the expectation that parents have that we call that creates a ranking mindset, where the child ends up always comparing themselves to other people. And as we all know, there's always going to be somebody prettier, handsomer, smarter, richer, more popular. So the idea here is, instead of teaching your child to beat the other guy, to be competitive in that sense, is to focus on being the best person they can, their personal best. For example, when my son was in 5th grade, he shows me a science project on tornadoes. And he did it all by himself on a big white piece, of cardboard. And he says to me, all right, Dad, if you were the teacher, what would you give me on this project? And I'm thinking to myself, sweet, because when my daughter would say that, who was 3 years older than him, if I said a B, she'd say, how do I get a B plus? If I said an A minus, how do I get an A? If I said a C, how do I get a C plus? Always with that attitude of how can I make it better? So I figure, like sister, like brother. So I walk around this project studying it. I said, well, Danny, I'll be very honest with you. If I was your teacher, I'd have to give this a B minus. He pauses for a second and he says, I can live with that. I never expected that. Now, 3 weeks later, Dad, here's my paper. What would you give me? And I'm thinking you want to be honest. Now, I now know no matter what grade I say, he's going to say, I can live with that. And if I say, well, I think you could do better, he's going to say, well, you always say that. Whatever I say, it's never good enough. So all I said to him was, well, Danny, is this your best? Because I only want to see it if it's your best. If it's not your best, don't show it to me. And then I put him in the bind. Only you know if it is your best. See, and that is a way how you can use personal best to motivate. Because what he basically said was, no, I think I can do better. I said, okay, show it to me when it's your best. Now, the irony is years later, so that was when he was maybe 14. Now he is 31. So he will send me something that he wrote to edit. And I will often say to him, Danny, this is good enough. And he will now say to me, I don't want it to be good enough. I want it to be really good. So that's how that played out, 17 years later. I will give you another example. I had a patient, 18 years old, a student at UCLA, and he came to therapy because he wanted to tell his parents that he was gay. And his fear, of course, was rejection. So I did some work with him and got him ready. And then he told his parents he was gay in my office. We had sort of predicted the reactions, but to make the long story short, his mother came down with migraine headaches. 2 days later, I referred her to a friend of mine, and he felt great. And that is an example of how the pressure was reduced when he could become assertive and feel safe to express his feelings. If parents want to reduce the feelings of unhealthy parental pressure, I would recommend strongly that they make it safe for their child, regardless of the age, to feel safe when they are articulating their thoughts and feelings. Because most parents will say, you shouldn't feel that way, or that's a silly type of thought. But the kid does feel that way. So learning how to respond with a sense of empathy is very helpful. And I would recommend one concrete tip to parents, that anytime your child, doesn't matter again if they're in second grade, I was left out of the soccer game, nobody chose me, or whether they are 16, oh, I blew the test. Instead of responding immediately, to step back and think of a time when you experienced something similar. And then you will respond more effectively. This is an example of using your emotional intelligence, because what you're doing is you're using your thoughts to help you identify particular feelings, to understand somebody else's feelings. My son came home, again, another personal story, from a 10th grade chemistry test. I said, Danny, how'd you do on the test? He said, oh, it was really bad. I saw questions that I didn't even understand. And I was about to say, I told you had to study, you tried to cram and so on, but what good does that do? All I said was, you know what? That's a really scary feeling. And he said, yeah, that's how I felt, because I thought of myself in 9th grade science when I didn't know anything or recognize any of the questions. And remembering that put me in tune with what he was experiencing. And then later on that evening, we could talk about test strategies, for the future. I want parents to remember you can't change the past. This is the problem with criticism, that we criticize a kid for what they did rather than focus on what they're doing or they can do. So when parents criticize, one of the things, again, on a concrete basis, is they want to say things like, next time you have a test, you might be better off by studying a few days in advance rather than the last minute. Next time there's a ground ball hit to you, just bend down and block it, rather than the father who says, I can't believe you let that ball go through your legs. That doesn't help.
There are going to be many parents who watch or listen to this interview and say to themselves, oh my goodness, I have done everything that Dr. Weisinger has said you should try to avoid. Don't ever do it. What would you say to those parents about how to change that narrative for themselves and their children?
I would say, first of all, if the parents are recognizing that, I want to compliment them on having that awareness and also recognizing that how they have been communicating, dealing with their son or daughter via nonverbal messages might not have been the most effective way. And they realize they can do something about it because tomorrow is a new day. And I would tell, as a way of making that shift, just to focus on one thing. And there are many things they can, but just to choose one thing, because you can't do everything overnight. And I'd say one of the things is to recognize that your conversations are better suited to your child when they become a dialogue rather than a monologue. Most parents are used to telling their kids what to do. And if the kid responds, don't argue with me. And they start to exploit the hierarchy of the parent being above the child. I am the boss becomes the unspoken message. Do what I say. I mean, how would you like it if somebody said, oh, it's 9 o'clock, you have to go to bed, if you're not tired on that? Just like little things like that. So when you ask for a dialogue, and the way you do that is by asking things like, well, how do you feel about this? Or what do you think? Or I'd like to hear more of your thoughts. And when their teen starts speaking, the parents can use their nonverbal, yeah, because every time you shake your head, it's encouraging them to self-disclose. That parents should start to, instead of just talking about the facts and superficial communication, they should start having an exchange that involves thinking and feeling. And I said, remember, I said, you have to make it safe, because for a teen to express his or her feelings to a parent is very risky. They might be ridiculed, they might be afraid to do that for a number of reasons. So it's very important for the parents to listen in a non-evaluative way. That's why you shouldn't feel that way is a ridiculous thing to say, because the kid does not feel that way. It makes more sense to validate their feelings, and then you can talk about them.
Just an incredible amount of nuggets of wisdom and all kinds of food for thought for parents. Dr. Hank Weisinger, your book is called The Unlikely Art of Parental Pressure, a Positive Approach to Pushing Your Child to Be Their Best Self. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks. And I just want parents, again, I'm using this as my closing line, is that when you make parental pressure work for you as a sense of guidance and encouragement and support and wisdom, then I can say that the force will be with you. That's what I want parents to remember.
Thank you so much, Dr. Weisinger.
Thank you for having me.